In 1932, legendary director Ernst Lubitsch delivered Trouble in Paradise, a sparkling pre-code romantic comedy that defines sophistication and wit. The film follows a pair of charming con artists, played by Herbert Marshall and Miriam Hopkins. They set their sights on a wealthy perfume heiress, portrayed by Kay Francis. But when love and deception intertwine, their perfect scheme faces unexpected complications. With Lubitsch's signature touch, light, playful, yet razor sharp, Trouble in Paradise is a masterclass in elegance, romance, and comic intrigue. Nearly a century later, it remains one of the most stylish and influential comedies in cinema history. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Trouble in Paradise.
Madame Collet, if I were your father, which fortunately I am not, and you made any attempt to handle your own business affairs, I would give you a good spanking. In a business way, of course.
What would you do if you were my secretary?
The same thing.
You're hired.
I need the dinner to be marvelous. We might not eat it, but I need it to be marvelous. Will and I sat down and watched the 1932 version of Trouble in Paradise. Release date, October 30th, 1932. Tagline, a gentleman thief and a lady pickpocket join forces to con a beautiful perfume company owner. Romantic entanglements and jealous confuse the scheme. Directed by Ernst Lubitsch. I believe I'm saying that correct. Lubitsch.
Yep.
Directed or distributed by Paramount Pictures. Runtime of an hour and 23 minutes. Starring Miriam Hopkins, which is new to us, Will. Kay Francis, which is new to us. And Herbert Marshall, who played Gaston Munescu. Will,
Yep.
This movie had 4 different genres on my thing. It was a crime thriller, it was a comedy, it was a drama, and there was a 4th one I can't remember. All I know is that I took away from this movie that it was a comedy and a damn good one. I don't know about you. You tell me what you thought.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely a comedy, right? I mean, there's a little bit of drama mixed in there. I mean, there's some real stakes with going on for old Herbert Marshall here as he falls in love with Kay Francis because there's a real chemistry there. It really jumps off the screen at the dialogue they have together throughout that kind of that end of the second act into the third act where they're kind of falling in love with each other. But yeah, absolutely hilarious. I thought there was 10 to 15 lines here that I could have paused and written down. I can't remember them all. I kind of gave little jot notes here, but it was very, very funny movie. And just it's one of those ones that you look at and you're like, man, if I sat down and just kind of started writing, like this is the thing that I would want to be able to write. Like something like this, where you have this like just back and forth between characters who have a really good chemistry. It doesn't have to be a love story, but that chemistry between people that just feels real, feels authentic. And to be able to put that on screen like this, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of anything is the witty kind of war that takes place between 2 characters, right? I love it. And you're right. It doesn't have to be a romance story. It doesn't have to be characters in love. Like I think of like Christoph Waltz and Leonardo DiCaprio and the chemistry that the 2 shared in Django at the dinner scene, right? Like how important it is for those 2 main characters to have that chemistry to get us through heavy dialogue, right? Because you're going to get these great performances from both because they're great at their craft. But if one stands out above the other, they might steal the scene, and the scene itself kind of falters. Where when they're both on level playing field here, it just really adds to the overall enjoyment of the movie. And I thought both, Miriam and Kay had chemistry with Herbert, but I thought it was clear that Kay, the lady that played Madame Collet, I thought she had more chemistry with Herbert Marshall, Manescu's character. Is that kind of how you saw it too?
Yeah, I think that's intentional, right? Because the whole movie is kind of hinges on this, which directions Manescu gonna go. Like, is he gonna fall off the cliff with the girl he's trying to swindle, or is he gonna fall back with the other thief, his pickpocket, his shoplifting connoisseur,
Yeah, and he's enamored with her in the beginning because of the very, the things that they share in common. I like to do something, and I always forget to tell you this. This is something that we did on the last podcast, and I'd like to keep doing it going forward. But it's a modern day recast, and Pierce Brosnan just jumped off the page to me, like the 90s Pierce Brosnan, the Thomas Crown Affair, like that guy who was on top of the world in these types of like crime thriller romances. I can't think of a better person to play, Gaston Monescu than Pierce Brosnan, because I can see it, right? I can see him in this role where he's the charming thief. And yet somehow at the end of it, he, instead of getting his upcomings, he gets away with it. Now, depending on which way you wanted the movie to go, depends on which girl it would be. But if I was the modern day recast, at least the male role, Pierce Brosnan kind of falls into that for me. What do you think?
Yeah, my first thought here was Chris Pine, to be honest. As soon as you started talking about it, that was the first person that popped in my head. He's been in kind of a movie like this where you've got two guys and the girl. Maybe we talked about this film before. This is War? Is that what that movie's called?
Him and it's Tom Hardy, right? Him and Tom Hardy.
Yeah. So he's got a type of charisma that kind of just jumps off the screen too. Pierce Brosnan's a really good pull because Pierce Brosnan's the type of guy that you can see in a movie, even if it's not a very good movie, and you're just like, this was okay, because he's just always good.
He's cool. He's cool. He's a good-looking charm. We all want to be that guy, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. I say modern day recast. 90s or 30 years old. Pierce Brosnan's on his, he's got to be pushing 70. So maybe Chris Pine is a better person to go with, or maybe if I were thinking present day recast, I'm not sure. These get a little tough with this generation of actors because. Sure. They're so young right now, right? Like you need more of a mature person in that role. Maybe it's what's the gentleman that he's getting his flowers right now for Twister, for Anyone But
Powell.
You. Yeah, Powell. He's getting a little bit older. He's like in that 30s bracket. Yeah, he could fit in that, if you're looking for, I'm trying to think of a brunette actor that sticks out to me that's in their 30s right now. But yeah,
Austin Butler.
Who'd you just say? Oh, Austin Butler would. Yeah. He might be a little too. I think he might be a little too rigid. Maybe a little too gritty.
Maybe you might be right. I think that's kind of a choice in his roles as of late. But and kind of like a female lead, Jennifer Lawrence. Clearly, she would be the perfect fit for Lily. Right. For
Lily, yeah, I was gonna say the Miriam Hopkins character. She fits that really well. Where are we going with Madame Collet? Who's a sophisticated what's that? Anna DeBelle? Am I saying her name? Yeah, she feels like a good one for Madame Collet.
She could be a perfume mogul or mogulette or whatever you call.
She's got status about her.
Like. Maybe go a little bit older with like a Cate Blanchett or something. Yeah. No.
Wow, we're really going older there.
Yeah, but still works.
Still works. We'll just go as far as that. Still works. No, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought the comedy stood out more to me than the drama, but with this type of story, they're kind of putting the stakes in at the end, which I actually think work really well. We get this great moment of confrontation. And I think confrontation scenes, the idea of them, if you can get a movie to this kind of moment of where characters are on screen together for the first time, where we get Miriam Hopkins' character and Kay Francis' character on screen for the first time, before they even speak. If you're excited about that kind of meet cute, right, then the movie's doing its job. Now, whether or not you get the payoff you're looking for, which I think this movie kind of fails to deliver any type of, meaningful payoff. And I think that kind of ultimately falls on the Kay Francis character and maybe how this story kind of plays out, which I do think is a fault in the movie. If you're taking it as a serious drama, if you're taking it as what it is, comedy, it's okay, right? But it makes you say a prayer for all of the Madame Collets in the world who get robbed and basically smile as they're doing it. It's just
Yeah.
not really realistic, right?
Well, no, but also like it's kind of saying something too about like wealth and class here, right? Where she can get robbed like this and it's not going to be a big deal. I mean, he essentially says it in that climactic scene, like, I'm just a poor man. I can get thrown in jail, but there's I think that you're hitting on the right point here is that this is supposed to be a comedy first. And then there's some serious sub what's the word I'm looking for? Like underneath,
So
like
yeah, sub narrative, subtopic,
yeah,
subgenre, yeah, something.
yeah. So there's some other stuff that's kind of lying underneath that you can think about, but it's not necessarily as important as the comedy here.
Well, let's dive into that then. Let's go into the themes if you want. So, what is the great message being sent here? Is it just a story of classism and how the well-to-do are always well-to-do, even if they are taken advantage of? They're always in a position of power, privilege, because even at the end, she's the one that has the control to let them go on their way, right?
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if there's I don't know how much of that is like a main theme. I'm not sure. Like what's the theme of Dumb and Dumber, right?
Well, it's best friends overcoming the odd. I don't know. That's a great question.
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious here. Like maybe this film doesn't need to have like some overarching theme. Maybe it can have like minor things that it's kind of poking at a little bit. Like, hey, this is a topic that maybe we should be thinking about, but we don't have to be super serious about it right now. But just something to kind of point
Yeah.
at.
And,
So I'm
and,
wondering if that's kind of what's going on here.
yeah, and I think sometimes people just want to make a fun movie and they're
Mhm.
not thinking about these things. They're just like, hey, these are characters that exist. And because we made this movie and we went this route with it, people are inevitably going to have these types of conversations because that's what we do.
Right.
When in reality, there might not be too much thinking on the front end of these things.
Yeah.
It might be fun to poke at classism here because it is funny to poke at classism here. These are
Yeah.
the areas in which it's funny to do so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there could be a lot of that in this movie. So
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so. I think there's probably, I don't know, I'd probably have to watch this again to really get at some of those themes. It was hard because, to be honest, for about half the movie, I was kind of judging it pretty strongly against Grand Hotel because of the similarities
there's
here.
so many similarities. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I was kind of outside of the comedy and thinking about this in comparison to Grand Hotel, I kind of wasn't paying attention to the full like, hey, what is this? What's the important theme here? So I think that's kind of on me, but um,
So it's funny you say that because there was moments where I'm like, I had to kind of like separate the two because I was having a hard time. I was like, oh, wait a minute, this happened in the Grand Hotel, but not in this movie, because
right,
just even story structure or like location structure kind of felt similar because she's so rich. She lives in this big mansion. You feel like they're in, because the secretary, Herbert Marshall's character has his own room, right?
hmm
And Madame Collet has her own room. And when the butler comes up at the end of the movie, you feel like they're in a hotel, right? So
yeah,
you can kind of say that there are a lot of similarities between the two,
yeah,
just months apart in the way they were, released. So
hmm
um, before we get to some interesting anecdotes about the movie, Will, let's talk about Herbert Marshall's character a little bit. Just not just his character, but just the job that he did. I found him to be maybe the most likable male character that we've had, who you're not really sure if he's an antagonist, protagonist. You just like him. And
hmm
I use the word presence a lot, but I just thought that because you could just tell that Herbert Marshall kind of knew who, Gaston Monescu was, who he was
yeah,
supposed to be, and how he was supposed to be kind of portrayed. I thought he hit a
yeah.
home run with the way his portrayal of this character. I really do.
Yeah, no, I thought he was excellent, and his cadence and the way he spoke, just everything just kind of fit together perfectly. The way he was kind of dishing it out here, so yeah, I'm on board with you 100%.
Yeah, I didn't deep dive too much into what he's done previously, but this is the first thing we've seen of all three of these characters. So it's interesting because this, as an anecdote, this was considered to be a decent ensemble cast. We just had that last week with the Grand Hotel. And some of the other characters here, just to run through them real quick, you had the Major, who was played by Charles Ruggles. You had Francois Philiba, who was Edward Everett Horton. And I thought both of those guys, they're just good pieces in this kind of this comedy, because you got to have those two guys that are kind of getting the wool pulled over their eyes a little bit and play it straight and play it the way that they do, and they do a really good job. And even so much at the end, the Adolphe J. Guiron, who is played by C. Aubrey Smith, and then finally Jacques, the butler, played by Robert Gregg. I just thought everybody kind of felt like nobody stood out to me. It felt like they all played the role well, and this to me was a very good ensemble cast movie where, it didn't feel like one person was going for it or the other one was, put into a role that maybe they shouldn't have been. When we talk about Jean Harlow quite a bit, unfortunately, so far, nobody felt like they didn't have a purpose, and that's what I liked about this movie.
Yeah, right. And the way it's written too, for the characters to kind of the Philippa character, especially how you see him telling the story again in a new setting, right? Where he's told the story once to the cops and he thought it was fascinating, and he has to tell it again to the Major later in the movie. Like, it's just, there's small little things here that kind of all of these characters kind of get into that are just really well thought out.
Why is this not set in the States? Why is the Grand Hotel and this movie both not set in the States? Like, the Grand Hotel wasn't, am I correct?
Right. There's still a pretty big, the Grand Hotel was in Germany, right?
Germany, and this one was like Italy. So just out of curiosity, why is this seemingly feels like an American movie, even though you have these early Italian, languages in the beginning? Why are these movies being set in other locations?
Well, I think Europe is still kind of at the forefront of culture at this point.
Okay.
It's pre-World War II. France and Paris are like, that's where all the cool people go to, in the 30s to kind of hang out and, do their philosophizing and their writing and their poetry, and everything's happening in Europe at this time. So It's really not until after World War II that the U.S. kind of becomes a little bit more culturally centric. So
interesting. That makes total sense. It was like right there for me to see, and I couldn't put it together. You're right. That makes total sense to me. That's why I'm glad we do this together. Let's talk some interesting anecdotes, if you don't mind. We're getting close, Will, to the Code Haze kind of enforcement that changes a lot of these movies coming up. And I'm really, I don't want to say worried, but like cautiously concerned for, however long that period is, because it's going to take away some of these, areas, gray areas of fun, comedy, alluding to it. Now, it might present different areas as well, and we might have to work a little harder to get a joke or to find the innuendo. But I feel like we might get some stuffy sophistication, which is why we do get some some time period pieces and a lot of these things along the way. I'm just going to say cautiously concerned for where we're getting ready to go, but we're still in pre-Code Haze days, and this movie because of that, this movie was granted pre-code freedom. Obviously, Trouble in Paradise was made before the enforcement of the Hays Code, which comes in the next 2 years, which means it was able to explore themes that would soon be considered too risque for Hollywood. The film deals openly with romance, flirtation, and moral ambiguity, allowing Lubitsch to create a plot filled with innuendo and suggestive dialogue. Now, this isn't just talking about sex, right? It feels like that's the first, but we're talking about whether or not you're allowed to, allow thieves to get away with it, right? Or if there's got to be hard punishments on screen for any type of action like that. So these are going to be some areas that we need to kind of pay close attention to. What do you believe? Is there because I fall on the side, and clearly hindsight's 2020, but I fall on the side of this type of censorship is more detrimental than the benefits that come from it. Would you agree with that, or do you think the opposite?
No, I'm definitely on board, and honestly, like I'm not sure how much more I can add to that, because for me it's just clear and obvious, right? That censorship just doesn't work, because what censorship does is it it limits imagination for one, but then when imagination is able to kind of penetrate through that, the censorship, it can make things almost worse, because all of a sudden it's like the forbidden fruit, where if we just talked about these things and made them explicit and had them in front of us a little bit more often, I think it would overall make for a healthier person.
And who wouldn't want that? I mean, feels like half the country might not want that. We'll see.
Yeah.
Um, Going off of that, so I want to piggyback. So there's something called the Restoration and Legacy that happened after 1934. So unfortunately, fortunately for us, we were able to get our hands on the original version of this movie. But after the production code was enforced in 1934, Trouble in Paradise was then pulled from circulation due to its amoral characters and risque tone. The film was effectively lost for decades and completely banished from being allowed to be seen from the public at large. Trouble in Paradise was praised for its sophisticated storytelling and remains a touchstone of early Hollywood wit and style, but it wasn't until 1968 that this movie found its way back into theaters. So it's just incredible. When I say cautious and concerned, we're talking a long time of decades of movies that are about to come here, where we are going to be faced with some remnants of the post-Hays Code.
Yeah. No, I think there's probably going to be that. It's going to wane, right? So I don't think it's going to, I think the first few years are going to probably be tough, but then it's going to slowly wane. I would imagine, where you kind of, when we're getting closer to the end of the Hays period, we start to see a little bit like small steps towards, art not being censored. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that this period isn't huge. And I mean, even that being said, there's great. I mean, 1939 is supposed to be the all timer, right? And that's smack dab in the middle of the Hays period. So if that's the case, I mean, we're going to find good movies.
What does a pre-code Hays 1939 Wizard of Oz movie look like? Does Dorothy have like a one night stand with one of the Munchkins? Like, do we get like this weird risque? Like, what happens in that time period if it doesn't? Yeah, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it goes better without an answer. Will,
as long as it's not one of those flying monkeys, I guess. No, there's definitely more drugs, right?
For sure.
Definitely more drugs.
Definitely. The last one I wanted to talk about, and diving into the lasting legacy that the director Ernst Lubitsch had. There's literally a thing that came from these movies known as the Lubitsch touch, Will. And what I love about this is Lubitsch's directing style, known as the Lubitsch touch, is evident throughout the film, characterized by subtle humor, visual wit, and sophisticated innuendo. The style was so admired that directors like Billy Wilder, Alfred Hitchcock, they studied his work and tried to emulate his ability to tell a story through what was implied rather than what was shown. Now, I want to bring up some other things, because that definition kind of makes you think that they had a handle on what Lubitsch's style actually was. When I did a little more research, Will, it couldn't have been further from the truth. And here's why. Give me 1 second. I will find these things that help back up my conversation, I hope. Right here. Leo Braudy. This is another another director during the time. The Lubitsch touch, with its infrequent Freudian overtone of revealing previously hidden motivations, the sexual story by an adroit bit of business, or a focus on a significant object. The Lubitsch touch signals to the audience that the old interpreter is at it again, letting us in on a privileged perspective, embracing the audience as a co-conspirator of interpretation and an accomplice in the directors and cameras knowing this. Okay, that's what he believed the Lubitsch touch was. What's interesting is there's like 5 more here, and I'm not going to read them all, but just another one. A counterpoint of poignant sadness during a film's gayest moments. That's what another gentleman thought it was. Billy Wilder believed that it was the elegant use of the super joke, meaning you had a joke and you felt satisfied, and then there was one more big joke on top of it. He believed this is what Lubitsch touch was. So long story, being long-winded about this, is nobody really knew what that was, but they all acknowledged that this man had some fingerprints of something different than other directors around him, and they had to somehow emulate it. I thought that was pretty special.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, I think we know sports a little better than we know movies. And one of the things that you talk about in sports is like the it factor, right? Like how do we, and especially with like quarterbacks or star NBA players, like sometimes they just have it. And there's
how do you measure it? Yeah.
There's no way to really understand what it is. There's not really a way to kind of put your finger on it, but you can feel it. There's something felt. And I think that's what they're probably getting at here with this movie. And, the great movies that we've watched so far, there's something you can feel that the director is somehow reaching out beyond the film. He's reaching out and touching you as you're watching the film. And when a director is able to do that and make you feel something, even as something as simple a story as Trouble in Paradise, there's no way to really explain, but this movie was really, really good. And maybe I can't put my finger on it exactly. And that seems like even great directors had a hard time putting their fingers on it. So I think, that's really it.
What's so interesting about what you said, though, is it's so crazy because there's no tangible way to measure the it factor, right? But if you take 10 people that I would say are at least casual fans of something, right? Whether it be sports, like, so you were taking sports. If we were to take 10 quarterbacks in the NFL and we just listed them off, I bet we'd be damn close on identifying, both of us, who we thought had it versus who we thought didn't have it. There might be some nuances of areas of where we think someone is, but the term it usually jumps off the page and you just kind of get it, right? Tom Brady didn't throw a ball like Peyton Manning did, or didn't necessarily have the brains that Peyton Manning did, right? Doesn't throw a ball as good as Patrick Mahomes. Won 7 championships. So there's just certain tangibles that you don't understand, but they jump off the page. So it's just interesting. You're seeing it with Aaron Rodgers right now. Aaron Rodgers, who many people considered for the first 16 years of his career to be maybe the best, knocking on the door, if not on the Mount Rushmore. He was always high touchdown ratio to low interceptions. And now he can't seem to get over the hump. So I don't know, but the it factor is a real thing. And apparently Ernst Lubitsch had that. So just thought I'd put that out there, and I'm glad that you kind of felt it too, because I felt it, especially with some of the camera shots that they chose to use. Very cool in the way they did it. It felt you could see Alfred. When we get to Alfred Hitchcock in the rear window, you will see the direct influence of Ernst Lubitsch on those movies. I seen it today. So, gotcha. Last thing to note, this was 91% on Rotten Tomatoes, and this is the highest rated movie of all the movies in which we will watch this year. 4.1 on Letterboxd. So there are a lot of us out there that feel the same way.
Yeah.
Anything you want to talk about before we get into the scenes, my friend?
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to ask you how you watched this.
The only way I could, which is the only way you probably could watch it, on Daily Motion on my laptop. Did you watch it some other way?
Actually, I did. I watched it on Watch TCM, and it was actually kind of fascinating because it was bookended by a conversation with Rian Johnson. Are you familiar with Rian Johnson? The director.
Give me one second.
Did Knives Out. He did one of the Star Wars movies.
I'm not familiar with him then, no.
Okay. Yeah, so he he chose this as like they do double features on there sometimes with like famous directors, famous writers, stuff like that. And this was
Okay.
one of the movies that he chose. And it was just
Awesome.
interesting because you got about 5 minutes at the front of him talking about this movie and 5 minutes at the back. And it was really it kind of helped put into perspective some of the stuff that was going on because he just really obviously appreciates this movie. So I was just curious if you got that same experience
No,
or not.
but now do you have to be a member to something like that? Watch TCM because I love that TCM the way that's set up.
Yeah, actually, no. As long as you have a provider that has Turner Classic Movies. So, for instance, no free ads, but I have YouTube TV. So I was able to punch in my YouTube TV information, and I was able to get on the app.
That's awesome. I maybe I can get snippets of that Ryan Johnson interview and throw that into this episode because I would love to hear what he has to say on it.
Yeah.
I just Googled him. I do know who he is, but I wasn't familiar with the name, so I couldn't place him.
Looper.
Looper. Love Looper. Love's a strong word. Like Looper. I can't remember if I love Looper. I remember loving the idea of Looper. It's been a minute. I have to go back and watch it. But I remember thinking I loved Looper. So anyways, we move on. Opening scene as far as what's important here. We're trying to change things up just a tad. We're in Venice, Italy, that is. Gaston and Lily meet. And this is an interesting thing. I didn't quite understand. Were they somehow planning to meet? Or did he just see a pretty girl in a boat and whistle her up? I'm very confused because the dialogue he's having with the butler about, I opened up the show with it, about the, dinner must be marvelous. We might not eat, but it must be marvelous.
Yeah.
It lets me know that somebody's on their way for him. And then we see this Miriam Hopkins character, but then it acts like, where did they meet? How is this meet cute happening?
At this point, they're calling themselves the Count and the Baron. So they know each other through pseudonyms, or not necessarily pseudonyms, but fake identities.
Yes.
So they don't quite know who they are yet, or maybe they do and just haven't given it away. Okay. So they're kind of playing at each other a little bit here.
So there's been some prior engagement between them already that we were just not privy to that has set up this interaction where they actually reveal their true selves. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. You ever heard of this term, the Baron, before you got to the Grand Hotel?
I mean, if you would have asked me what a Baron was, I would have thought oil before this, but now apparently it's just some European rich guy.
Rich guy. Yeah. European rich guy. Yeah. I wonder how many kids are named Baron out there. Interesting. Grandpa Baron. I know. Opening scene. In Venice, gentleman thief Gaston Manescu cons an aristocrat while pickpocketing, cons an aristocrat. While pickpocket Lily Vautier lifts his wallet, they realize they are both master criminals and become romantically involved. Now, we get this wonderful scene that is kind of taking place where, they're kind of dancing with each other at first, not really revealing who they truly are. But it's the great scene when they finally sit down at the dinner table and they're one-upping each other. They're going back and forth. And and this is kind of where that Billy Wilder was talking about the, Ernst Lubitsch touch, where you think it's over and he goes 2 or 3 cons more, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, check your watch. Oh, well, check your, purse, whatever. It's just, it's funny because you thought, 1 or 2 of them examples would do. Not for the Lubitsch. He wanted to go 5-6 layers deep.
Yeah, and this is one where I'm kind of cribbing from that Ryan Johnson conversation a bit here, but like we get this payoff at the end, right, where we kind of get a comeback to this scene in that last scene in the car, and the reason why this is so long, at least according to Ryan Johnson, is because we really need this to pay off at the end. So kind of looking through it that lens, it kind of makes sense to have those couple extra things in there, so it's really memorable. It's not just something that you overlook. We end up talking about it when we're on our podcast. So,
dude, I must say I love the fact that Ryan Johnson chose that movie, and he's a director in Hollywood, and he's showing an appreciation, and that we drafted it because it just makes me feel like we're picking the right films. You know what I mean? Right. Like I feel like because we don't know, we're really just taking a collection of data that's given to us and trying to make the best guess. But it feels like we're right on the path. I feel like we're doing the right thing, Will.
Actually, just a little bit more on this. His wife is Corinna Longworth, and she has a podcast. You must remember this, where she talks about old Hollywood movies. So just an interesting little loop here that maybe after you're done listening to this, you can go kind of check her podcast out and see what professional looks like.
Yeah, they don't talk a lot about munchkins and Dorothy having one night stands on that podcast. So probably not. Gaston and Lily team up. They decide after falling, mad head over heels with they're both criminals at this point, and they both love it. Gaston and Lily form a romantic and criminal partnership, sharing their passion for high-end theft. They decide to target the wealthy Parisian, I'm not sure what that word is, but perfume company owner. Yep, thank you. Perfume company owner, Madame Mariette Collet. And this is played by, again, Kay Francis, who I really enjoyed Kay Francis in this movie. It's funny because at first you have this great Miriam Hopkins and Herbert Marshall kind of interaction, but like she soon, I don't want to say gets replaced. That's not fair because you said it was on purpose, but we just spent so much more time in this movie with Kay Francis along the way that you do kind of, I do think that you root for these two in the end, which then can leave us to mixed feelings by the time we get to the end.
Yeah, I think the only disservice here, we really need to see the two characters, Kay Francis and Minescu. We need to see them together, because if we didn't see them together as much as we do, there'd be like this. You wouldn't be able to. You wouldn't be able to like empathize with Minescu's character. We would be, if we were just with, I'm forgetting, Lily and Minescu the whole time, and then he was coming back, and then we find out he's in love with another woman. We wouldn't be able to empathize with it as much. So it is really important for us to see that chemistry and to understand why he's pulled in two different directions.
Do you think that they showed enough of because there's definitely a lot of interaction and top surface flirting that we can feel the kind of the undertone tensions that there's sexual chemistry here that they want to, partake in, and they're not. But do you think we get enough of that, once they have their kiss and they cross that line and they devour themselves, do we get enough of that love to actually believe that he's torn between these two again? Or should there have been a little bit more back and forth between him and Lily, him and, Madame Collet? Like, should we have seen more of a dance in just the scenes so that we can see his struggle in real time? Or do we get enough of them, like we get Lily and him in the beginning, we get a couple scenes in between there that kind of try to reinforce it, but in an hour 20 movie, maybe you don't get enough that would help it maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the only disservice here really comes in the ending, where that feels a little, I don't want to say cheap, but doesn't quite earn it all the way, because we've been with Collet and Minescu so much that we kind of forget how in love Lily and Minescu were at the beginning of the film. So there's a little disservice there, but it's tough because, it really is love is proximity, right? You hear that a lot about friendships. Friendship is proximity. But love is kind of the same way. Like who you fall in love with is who you end up around. And a lot of times that's a decision, but you don't get to choose who you meet necessarily. And
well, you only have so many hours in the day, and that's why majority of people work together, end up falling in love. It's like, where do you meet people? Well, you meet people where you are. Where are you? I spend most of my day at work, or I spend most of my day here at the grocery store, or whatever. That's just where you're going to meet people. It stands to reason.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, maybe if we're looking at a theme, that could be one of the themes that he's working with here. Is love really isn't about who you love. It's not about destiny or fate or anything like that. It's more about compatibility and who you're around. So
where you been?
Yeah, exactly.
I do think I will, for me personally, in my viewing experience, I felt like this movie, like that's the only knock on the movie for me is I felt like, oh, here's Miriam's character again. Here's Lily. She shows up at the end, and we had this big confrontation, which would work from her perspective. We know that she's upset, and to see this confrontation still works. However, to buy into what they ultimately decide to do, it feels a little lesser than, and I'm not going to say unrealistic, but like,
Sure.
I never really got the sense that he was more strong for what he ends up choosing, or maybe it's not even what he ends up choosing, it's what he ends up with. And again, you just have these women in these early day movies that can never just be strong enough to just leave the man fully behind, going all the way back to, was it the Broadway Melody or was it Our Dancing Daughters, where she went to entered the Peace Corps for 2 years, came back, and still was in love with the guy. What movie was that? It was one of those two. It was a Harry Beaumont film for sure.
Yeah, it was the one with Joan Crawford, right? So it was
Our Dancing Daughters.
Our Dancing Daughters, yeah.
Okay, because Anita Page was in both of them. So yeah, it was Joan Crawford and Our Dancing Daughters. So interesting. Let's move on. Madame Collet is introduced. Kay Francis, who plays Madame Collet, a glamorous widow, becomes the target for Gaston and Lily after she carelessly leaves her $125,000 purse handbag at the opera. Again, it works for the setting of this movie, but it also goes to this nonchalant nature of how much money she has. She can leave a $125,000 purse. I can tell you right now, I have a $125,000 wallet on my hand. It ain't leaving. It's duct taped to my body. So I know that. Gaston sees the opportunity and returns the purse. Excuse me. Gaston seizes the opportunity to return the purse, charming her into hiring him as her personal secretary. Now, there's some things that we jump around here on. Lily and Gaston see this in the newspaper that Madame Collet has lost her expensive purse, that they're going to be looking for it. People can come up to the door, yada, yada. They kind of plot a scheme of how they're going to, get this $20,000 in francs, as they call it. And that's the plan until Gaston gets there, and plans change a little bit because he gets hired because of his quick-witted nature of basically insulting this woman. Her eyeshadow, her tone, her color tone, all these things. But he does it with a smile, and therefore she buys into it and hires him because she's not used to men stating things like that to her. And that's why you buy into it.
Yeah, and I mean, he tells her he'll give her a spanking, and I think that I think she likes that. So, I think that had a little bit to do with it too. No, there's, what's so interesting about this scene is just like how there's some stuff that's not subtle, right? Like the spanking that stands out, but there's so many small things about like what he's choosing to say in these moments after he finds out about the safe, after he's seeing all the jewelry, he's starting to put these things together. And he doesn't have like this comical 1930s villain's face on, right? He's taking in the information and like running with it. And that might be the Lubitsch touch, not making things obvious, but letting us be smart enough to see it kind of unfolding in real time. So this scene's really important because it kind of sets everything else in motion.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And it's so funny because, it's so interesting because there is something taking place here where like there is a genius in his brain that says, look, we can be obvious here. We're like Herbert Marshall is literally staring at the safe, right? In such an obvious way that the audience knows that he's peeking in, right? Because he's kind of leaning in. He's not hiding it from the audience, but Kay Francis has no idea that this is even happening. That's obvious. That's very in our face, over the top. But then there's these subtle things in which he doesn't tell us that we get to choose for ourselves. And he clearly understands why he's doing that, where maybe we really don't, but we can identify that it's happening.
Right. Exactly.
So just next level, man. Next level. Gaston gains Madame Collet's trust. We move on. Gaston infiltrates Madame Collet's social circle, quickly gaining her trust and access to her finances. Lily becomes jealous as she watches Gaston grow closer to Mariette while pursuing their plan to steal from her. Another thing that they do in this movie is they, not just this movie, but this whole time period, there's this idea of like how much time has passed. And I think we get an idea towards the end that like 2 weeks or something is really how long he was really their secretary. But, you know, they're in love, and it's just something that we buy into and allow. And who am I to judge and say they're not? But it's just funny because it did feel like up until they revealed the 2 weeks, I thought some significant amount of time must have gone by. Did you not feel this?
Yeah, a little bit, but there's also the scene where they're, you know, Lily and him are talking, and they talk about their anniversary robbing, which I thought was hilarious, but kind of puts into perspective, like they were only like 3 or 4 days when they were like setting up their plan to get the $20,000 francs, and when she's actually in there doing some of the secretary work herself. So there's some stuff here. I think you just kind of have to, with this time period, you just kind of have to accept that the time we're extra attuned to this now because there's so much universe building that we do, like as a consumer culture in our movies. Like, hey, like, you know, this happened in this film, and we have to be able to line up and make sure that it's exactly coordinates with the next film in the series. And there's just all this stuff that we're always working with, where that doesn't matter back then. So they just treat it a little bit differently, and it throws me off sometimes too. But I'm getting better at taking it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I feel like it felt like there was like two extremes. It was like these short, you know, quick kind of romantic, you know, excursions or adventures to go on. Or it was like these time periods that we're going to come up on here soon that take place over, you know, 20, 30, 40 years. It just feels like maybe we haven't, you know, learned that like you can tell an 18-month story and how to do that on camera, you know, without going over a 2-hour time limit or something. You know, exposition, how much can I show in the background? It's like, I think they're kind of reluctantly handing over the credit to the audience, but they have to kind of program the audience along the way, which is what you just said. We are so privy to universal building, and kind of like before we've seen the first, you know, scene of a movie, we're already kind of have an idea of what this movie is based on maybe a trailer or based on whatever, just our own, you know, whatever we brought with us to that seat that day.
Yeah. That
wasn't necessarily the case back in the 1930s.
Right. And what's really interesting is you kind of said this, and I started thinking about the like time on the scale of the film versus time in the scale of the scene, because he is interested in tracking time, because we get a lot of shots in especially the one scene where we're tracking the clock. Kind of repetitively, he keeps going back to it. So I just wonder if this movie's too smart for me, because I'm wondering if he's like kind of saying something here about like, hey, like time in those moments where you're kind of with someone that you care about, we can track it, and it doesn't, him showing the clock in that scene and it going, you know, there's like a 6-7 hour period there that kind of gets fast forwarded, and they don't realize how much time they're losing versus those couple weeks that go by where we're kind of, this is not a very well formed thought, but like I'm just trying to be cognizant of these two different kind of mechanisms that he's working with, like, and I'm wondering if there's something smarter going on, and I'm just not privy to it.
No, I think you're onto it, and that stuff always goes over my head because I kind of understand that something's taking place, and I can kind of see, you know, reasons that would give me, you know, like evidence of that, but like I can never put my finger on why maybe it's being done or the overall thought process behind it. So I think you're onto something. I can't help you along the way, and I wish I could. So something we'll come back to when we circle around the second time around.
All right.
Let's move on. Romantic tensions emerge. Gaston spends more time with Madame Collet, which then builds tensions between him and Lily, though it's complicated by Gaston's loyalty to Lily. Meanwhile, Lily tries to keep their focus on their heist as Gaston grows conflicted. this is the part that I thought we could have done a little bit better job of, like, maybe dancing back and forth, just kind of getting the overall, showing him still loyal to Miriam, which I think they do. Like, they do come back to it. Maybe for my palate, I would have liked it a little bit more. But it ultimately leads to the plot to steal Madame Colet's fortune. Now, Gaston and Lily prepare to steal a large sum of money from Madame Colet's safe. At the same time, two of Madame Colet's admirers, Major and Francis Philibba, grow suspicious of Gaston's intentions. Now, Philibba can't quite remember, where he's seen this person. In the beginning of the movie, he's like, I've never seen that man before in my life. But then, like, as they start talking and he gets, about the doctor, the word doctor triggers him. And right away, Major and Philibba have to go and tell Madame Colet what they've discovered, because at the beginning of the movie, Gaston was the Dr. Tonsils who needed to come in the house and look at this idiot's tonsils, even though he didn't order for a doctor. So it's funny to me because I do think there is something being said a little bit about the affluent people in this movie. They all seemingly can get the wool kind of pulled over them a little bit, and I don't know if that's just because they put their guard down because they're so rich. And the other characters, which are the not, well-to-do, they kind of are the smarter brains in this movie. There's something being said there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you are onto something there, especially with like the board characters like Giron, kind of being so they're being really protective of the company, and the board is kind of a stand-in for, they have money but maybe don't have wealth, right? Like they're rich but not wealthy, so because they're still trying to kind of hold on to what the control they have as Montesquieu's character is kind of slowly pulling things away from the board, and the board's kind of holding on tight, and Miriam's just kind of off in the background. So there is something going on there that I think is important to note, but maybe I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah. But right after this, though, so you have this thing that's happening. You have this kind of fight for control. You have Gaston, who Manescu, who is loyal to Lily. He's going to go forward with the heist still, but now we actually get the crossing of the line between Madame Colet and her secretary. In this case, it's Gaston, and she knows him as what's the name he was going by the whole time? Lavier or Lamel, something, Lavelle, something of that nature. She thinks he's someone completely different, and they share a kiss. They share how they're in love and how they have the rest of their lives to kind of figure this out. Meanwhile, Miriam's had enough. Lily's had enough, and she's going to take matters into her own hands. And she's there to steal the money out of the safe. And Gaston catches her. And that ultimately leads to this confrontation. Now, I mentioned it before, Will, that the confrontation is between Lily and Madame Colet. That's what they're building to, right? At least they're not necessarily building to it, but when we get this confrontation between the two, we're excited to have it. I felt like that's the most interesting part of the movie. And then how it plays out for me was the payoff wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. I do love the end scene in the car, but I just don't buy that these women would continue to, because she says it. I don't buy the idea that they were stuck to the plan so convincingly that Lily did not believe that he chose her. Do you believe that they stuck to the plan so convincingly that Lily was in on it the whole time, playing her part, and that she knew the whole time that he didn't actually choose her, even though she said it out loud? Because I was convinced that he chose her.
Oh, so I took this last scene as like more along the lines of Lily not being 100% certain that she wanted to be with Montesquieu. And it wasn't until we get that drawback or that callback to that first scene where they're kind of pulling random things out and showing the things that they stole, um, that they kind of realize that this whole time they should have been together. And I think it's more like Montesquieu's kind of realizing that whatever aspirations he had with Madame Collet, they weren't real, and what's real is in that car. So I didn't take this as they were in on it the whole time together. I took it as like there was still some tension in this car until they realized like they could come back together. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm with you on the end. I guess where my issue was is like I agree with you on how you've dissected Monescu's character. Okay, I think he realized ultimately in that car that like it wouldn't have worked with the other woman. Like you and I are so alike. My heart is in this. This is what we are. We're criminals, and we belong together, right? I agree with that. I guess it's the Lily component to me a little bit, where I believe that when they're having the confrontation, I believe Lily believes that Monescu chose Madame Collet.
Okay.
And she leaves not wanting to be with him anymore.
Yeah.
Because he chose Madame Collet. So I guess because of that, then they have this thing in the car and she just ultimately forgives him because maybe she too is like, well, maybe I'm allowing him to, get away with this because we just are too much alike. But that part, I'm just not 100% sure I bought because of her, but it's a comedy in my eyes and I don't dive that deep with it. So.
Yeah, no, I think you have a good point. I'm not sure how I would counter it. I think there's probably some stuff up in the air as far as like Madame Collet. Her interest in him always feels surfacey, right? Like it's some
transactional.
Sort of like and she's dipping down into the secretary pool, right? Like she doesn't ever seem to really think of this as like this is a love story, baby say yes, like a Taylor Swift song. It's more like it's an R&B song about two people coming together, so
Yeah.
I think there's something there, and in that conversation Lily kind of realizes like there's no way that they're gonna stay together because she's not really that interested in it. This has always been flirtation for her. So I think there's some of that going on, but I'd probably have to sit down and watch this again to really draw out my conclusions.
Yeah, and maybe you're right. I just, some of the things that took place, led me one way, but the genius that takes place in this scene, because there's some great dialogue and comedy in this scene too. And it comes from Lily, most of it, in my opinion, where she is having the big kind of like monologue of her departure. And she says, you were willing to give away this man for this amount of money, and therefore you can keep this money. And then you were willing to do this, so therefore you owe me 100,000 franc. And out she goes. And it's just like this great, it's just this great dialogue of comedy that if you're not paying attention because it's happening fast, you might miss miss the laughs. So
yeah, she has another line too right before that. I won't fall for another man if he was the biggest crook on earth. Like this movie's hilarious, and it was really well done. I think you're right that there's probably some stuff that I'm thinking like what we're going to talk about next is our stars, our ratings and stuff, and like I'm trying to justify in my mind why I think this is a 5-star movie because I kind of am leaning that way, but there are things that I think you'd have to watch again to really reinforce that position.
Interesting. Well, when we get there, we'll have that conversation. I wanted to ask this last question, because this movie, in my opinion, after thinking about it now for a couple days, is I actually don't think I think it's great. We have a love story where the main protagonist male, it's 2 females, 1 male. And usually in that setting, the male has to make a choice. And usually 90% of the time, I would argue, we get a choice. Like the male, if he ends up with one of them in the end, it's because the male made a choice. Yeah. Right? I don't believe the male ever makes a choice in this movie. I really don't, because what's happening is like the set of circumstances are just kind of unraveling in front of him,
Yeah.
and all the other players are making choices, not him. And it
Right.
kind of lets him off the hook in this weird way where the audience doesn't have to like be upset with the fact that he chose maybe there's half of people rooting for Madame Collet or half rooting for, Lily's character. And since he doesn't choose, he gets off the hook and he ends up just getting what he gets. And in this case, Lily's the one who's willing to stay with him, where Madame Collet is willing to give all of her stuff to him, but not necessarily, herself to him, which is like, I just found that to be interesting that he didn't make a choice.
Yeah, I think he did make a choice, right? And the fact that he told the truth to Madame Collet.
Yeah.
That was the decision that he had to make. And he made that decision, and everything else kind of fell into place because of it. If he had lied there, I think he gets caught, right?
Yeah.
Because if he lies, Madame Collet doesn't, give away that she thinks that he could be the great Montesquieu, right? That the major and Philippa. Yeah. So if he doesn't tell the truth, he gets caught. And if I think that's really important, because the choice he makes is the truth. And the truth is he can't be with Collet. There was never a chance of this happening. So all of that fever dream of, a better life with Madame Collet it wasn't real.
I love that. Okay. So there was a choice made. It wasn't necessarily the choice about what girl to be with, even though it essentially is. It's a choice to tell the truth or not. And when you choose that route, the decision for which girl you'll be with will ultimately be there anyways. It lies in the truth. So I like that. Yeah. No, dude, I'm not going to go as far as a 5 because I feel like there's not enough. 5s for me have to be, I'm very hard on smart comedy. I really am, and I don't know why. And I've had this conversation again, like, what's a funnier movie? A smart comedy that doesn't make you laugh as hard, but makes you laugh more over time? You know what I mean? Or the gut-wrenching, over-the-top, physical, whatever comedy that made you just pee your pants the first time, but loses its luster down the road. It's a very tough conversation. But I really like this movie. So I'm going to give you the stage now to make your case on where you are at least falling where you fall today with it. What rating?
Yeah. So usually I have a rule of thumb where it's like, I can't give a 5-star movie. I can't give a movie 5 stars right away, because a 5-star movie, you have to watch again almost inherently, because admitting something as 5 stars means you understand it pretty well. Right. And there's been a couple movies that we've watched just once, like City Lights, I gave 5 stars, and M, I ended up giving 5 stars. And I think built into those conclusions are, if I were to watch this again, I think it would still be 5 stars, right? I think here I'm probably going to end up at 4.5 stars, just because I would want to watch this one more time to make sure the assumptions I'm making about how smart this movie probably is true. So that's probably where I end up.
There's something to be said too about like the ease to watching a movie. Like I found this movie very effortlessly. Like it just was easy to watch. It was short. It was definitely short, where I think was Grand Hotel an hour 50 something. I can't remember. And maybe that's just why in comparison it felt that way, but it was just easy to watch. There wasn't like a lot of lulls, and I think that helps in these rating systems sometimes too, is like knowing when to cut something short, knowing when to do it. If you're going to make it longer, make sure you have a reason and that there's a purpose for it, but get out while you're on top,
Yeah.
So interesting. I think I'm at a 4, but you have made a compelling case for 4.5 for me, and I will decide to settle on that. My 5 rules are, if there's any questions, I usually don't give it a 5. Now I've given stuff that I thought was a 4.5, and I bumped it up to a 5 on a second watch, because I'm like, I missed this is better, whatever. But usually if I give something a 5 right away, even though it might not necessarily be perfect, there was something that was done perfectly enough that it deserves that rating. So that's where I'm at. But Yeah. So nominations. Do you have any nominations for best actor, supporting actress, whatever you have?
Yeah, so I think all three of our main characters here can kind of fall into nominations. Lily would probably be in supporting. I feel like she's not in it quite enough to get
Agreed.
a main, acting or actress nomination. And then Montesquieu and Collet, I think both would kind of fall in the actor actress, and I think deservedly because they're both just really good here. I don't. There's not really hardly any mistakes that they make. Everything seems to just kind of fall in place perfectly with them.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. Even though I think my favorite, I don't know. If you had to choose a favorite scene from the movie, which one do you think it would be?
Mm, that one's tough. I'd probably have to go with the second meet cute between Montesquieu and Collet. There's just something about the way he's kind of getting in with her without being super obvious about it
Yeah,
that is really appealing to me because it's smart writing,
yeah,
and that's always where I'm going to fall when I'm kind of judging things. What's most important?
yeah. It's so funny because like that is the meat and potatoes of this movie. Is anytime anytime Lily and Monescu are sitting down, anytime Collet and him are sitting down, and there's like 3 or 4 scenes in this movie of just those two, and it's just conversation, right?
Hmm.
It You live and die, I think, in those moments because you're building something in those moments. You're building suspense. You're building characters. You're building motivations. All these things
Yeah.
and chemistry and all these things, right? And he just hits a home run, I think, on every interaction. It's just a damn good movie, and I can't say enough good things about it. I really enjoyed this movie. So I did some quick research on Ernst Lubitsch, died very young, well, not very young, but 55.
Mm.
He was active from 1913 to 1947, which is what, quick math, 33 years,
Hmm.
and died as he was still active. So he was nominated 3 different times. From my
Mm.
understanding, did not win, was not nominated for this film, but definitely had a place in society. So that's what I have for Trouble in Paradise. I don't know if you have any other takes that you wanted to get off your chest, but that's where I'm at, buddy.
No, there's one thing that I thought was uh, extra hilarious that was like super subtle because it was anytime there's a foreign language, everyone's angry. Did you notice that?
Yep, everyone's
When
angry. I didn't
when it
notice
was
that, but it's
Italian,
funny that.
when
Yep.
it was French, they were always shouting. Like the perfect example of this is when he's talking to the police and the guy's turning to him and he's talking to him real gentle in English. Then he turns around and he's yelling at the cops and in Italian. I just thought that was hilarious. I don't know what makes you think to do that, but I just thought it was a great choice.
Yeah, and it's funny because this Ernst Lubitsch is a German-born, which there was a lot of these like non-American born filmmakers who came over to America and started making films. I just you would say that that's some like stereotype that American filmmakers have of like foreigners, but in this case, it's a foreigner who
Yeah.
maybe there's some truth. He just thinks everybody in his own kind is just angry.
Yeah, there's another line early in the film where someone, I think it's Lily, says to Montesquieu, "You are very American," and he says, "Thank you." Like, there's a lot of little subtle things along the way in this film that I really appreciate it. So,
I'm right there with you, buddy. Right there with you. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 1932's Trouble in Paradise. We move on. We are going to have our first double feature of this year, and it will be our last 2 movies of the year. So we've hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This will be 6 and 7 coming up. And it is I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang and A Farewell to Arms. Will you I think Paul Mooney, we've heard this name before. Gary Cooper, we've seen this name before. Helen Hayes. And then there's some new faces that are going to show up. But our old friend and our most repeated actor so far is Adolphe Menjou, who is going to be showing up in A Farewell to Arms. What do you know about these movies? and what do they have in common to our audience that makes it a double feature?
Yeah, so they're both war movies in ways. They're kind of A Farewell to Arms is more of a war movie than A Fugitive from a Chain Gang, but Paul Mooney was in Scarface, so it'll be cool to see him again. And A Fugitive from a Chain Gang sounds like it's a pretty, I don't want to say liberal because it's such a modern term, but it's, got some we the people agenda kind of behind it here. So I'm excited about that. And then you might have to tell me a little bit more about Farewell to Arms, because that one's kind of...
Well, it's funny here because we've had Adolphe Menjal so far who's been playing, I don't want to say he's been playing supporting roles, but more second leads, right? He's not necessarily the marquee names, but in this one, it's A Farewell to Arms with Helen Hayes, Gary Cooper, and Adolphe Menjal. So he's going to get the nod here, which I think is deservingly so, because everything we've watched with him so far, we've really enjoyed. The tagline on this one is: an American ambulance driver and an English nurse fall in love in Italy during World War I. And I think the thing that pushed this movie over the edge for us is one of the writers is Ernest Hemingway. So I'm just kind of curious to see what type of touch he has on it. There are two other writers that are tagged with him, but I'd just be curious to see how smart of a movie this is. Just considering one of the great literature writers of our time. So,
I think this is based on a book. I think this is a book of his. But again, my English in the 20th century, like English literature, is a little lacking. So I'm not a Hemingway scholar by any stretch of the imagination. So.
I'm not either. I did take a tour once, and I do remember something of like he only slept 3 to 4 hours at a time, would wake up right, and then would take 3 to 4 hours. He would never slept longer than 4 hours in any interval at all. He thought he would get more done that way. So take it or leave it. Whether that's true or not, you guys can Google it. All right, Will. That's after this, man. 32 is put to bed, and we're going to have that last pre-code year, at least by definition. But what I love is that we are now finally starting to get into full calendar years. Should be our Oscar years, should be our so it will be a lot easier to kind of decipher what films were up for Academy Awards. So
definitely exciting to be able to make sense of it when you're looking at it. So
for the rest of you guys know where to catch us at TikTok, Instagram. You can always reach out, engage to us on Letterboxd, and we'll keep seeing you on down the road. Keep watching movies.
All right, we'll see you.